Good morning friends and welcome back once again to NPTEL online certification course on Indian poetry in English. As you all remember, in the previous lectures we have been talking about postmodern Indian English poets, and in the previous lectures we talked about two major poets, namely Eunice D'Souza and Lakshmi Kannan. Actually, credit goes to Eunice D'Souza, who actually brought some major voices who were not paid too much attention, fine, some major voices, especially those of women's voices, in her anthology entitled 9 Indian Women Poets. And today we are going to talk about one of the most significant major assertive voices of Indian English poetry, namely of Tara Patel. Friends, the worth of a poet usually we understand when a poet writes so many volumes and a poet has got so many collections to his or her credit. But you will be surprised to know that today we are going to talk about a poet who had got only one volume or only one collection to her credit, yet the sort of spark, the sort of power, the sort of theme that she took upon actually made her a very revolutionary force to reckon with. So, before we go to talk about Tara Patel's works and her poetic oeuvre, let us also talk about the background, the scenario which actually prevailed during the time when Tara Patel started writing. All of you are reminiscent of the fact that Indian poetry in English, especially Indian writing in English, has got 3 or 4 phases. The very first phases, as we have been talking about, was the phase of colonialism, when our poets were actually imitating their masters. I mean the English or the British poets. Some of them were imitating the British romantic poets, some of them were also imitating metaphysicals or whatsoever, and then came the new wave, that is of nationalism, from 1900 to 1950, and after independence we have seen the rise of modernism, and this modernism also affected Indian English poets. Now we are in the phase of postmodernism, and in postmodernist phase, which actually is influenced by many of the voices from different countries, from USA, from England, and from some other neighboring countries as well. So, the period from 1980 to present can be considered to be the postmodernist phase of Indian writing in English. So, this fourth phase was not only having poets who were males, but women's voices also made themselves heard in this phase. As I told you earlier that we have already discussed poets like Eunice D'Souza and Lakshmi Kannan, but then there are some other voices also who might have not contributed that much. Their voices were so forceful, and in this regard we can talk about the voice of Tara Patel. Needless to mention that in the lectures that follow later, we will also be talking about Meena Kandasamy and then Temsula Au, Mamang Dai and many more. So, Tara Patel is one such strong voice of women's poetry which actually belongs to the period of this postmodernist phase of Indian poetry writing, especially in English. Now, since I have said that Tara Patel became famous only because of her one volume or only because of her one work that was entitled Single Woman, fine. Now, in this collection you will find poetry which actually deliberates upon and discusses the themes which are confined only to women's issues. Now, who was Tara Patel? Tara Patel actually was born in 1949 She had her early education in Gujarat, and then she switched over to Malaysia, where she spent many years, especially 20 years in Malaysia. And then she came to Mumbai, where she not only started writing, but she started working as a freelance journalist also. That was her job. She was also familiar with Nissim Ezekiel, who not only supported but also appreciated the efforts of this poet Tara Patel. Tara Patel is a poet, a columnist, and a freelance journalist. Her only collection entitled Single Woman was published in the year 1992. So, naturally, when a poet writes in 90s, now you can think about what sort of change the poet can bring about in his or her poetry. So, one can find a vestige of revolution, because till now we have been talking about those women poets, especially who have been trying to assert their own voices, and they had been trying to write in a manner where one can say there was a sort of feminist concern. But too much of feminism, or when the feminist voices started to be heard, then actually came some different topics. Sometimes it is not only about feministic voice, but it is also about the self, because now the woman has come out of her own right of being a feminist. And when the feminists actually allowed them this expression, this free expression, naturally the poets took into their oeuvre some other questions. But as an exception, Tara Patel was confined mostly to the issues of women's poems. So, her lone collection entitled Single Woman has got many famous poems. Some of the poems we shall take up for discussion, and in order to see how Tara Patel, in a very transparent, in a very frank manner, in a very ruthless manner, not only attacks the world of men, but at the same time Tara Patel actually uses a language which is open, uses a language which does not have the subtlety of ambiguity, or that poetic ambiguity which many people consider it to be a sort of spark. But what Tara speaks, Tara is very candid, very frank, and she frankly also speaks and writes about the body, the woman's body. Rather, she very frankly talks about sexuality. So, this in a way became quite uncommon in a country like India, where the males were not writing anything so transparently about bodies, but when it comes to women writers or women poets, they have started writing in such a fashion. So, some of the poems which are included in the collection entitled Single Woman are titled Woman, then comes Request, then comes In Mumbai or Bombay, then Mother, then In a Working Women's Hostel, then Now and Then, and there are many more poems. We shall take up some of the poems in order to make our discussion more interesting, and also to explore how Tara Patel, even though one can find the treatment of women by men in Tara Patel's work, and especially, but then there is a different sort of opposition, and the opposition is, there is an opposition of misandry. I mean, it appears now they are not revolting against men, but rather there is actually a sort of yearning for desire, and this desire can be satiated and fulfilled by men only. Because in one poem after another, we can hear the voices of loneliness, the voices of alienation, the voices of dejection, the voices of despair, the voices of debasement, the voices of the neglect of the body, the voices of marriage, the voices of unfulfillment in a romantic marriage. And at times there is also the illusion of love, which is actually transferred with in many of the writings of Tara Patel. Now, as I have been saying that Tara Patel's themes actually were confined to women's issues, and since she had only one collection to her credit, then whatever poem we can take up for the discussion will find that there is a sort of agonizing experience of women in the poems of Tara Patel. And this agonizing experience is actually born of the unfulfilled desire, and sometimes of being abandoned, sometimes of despair, sometimes there one can find a sort of existential crisis at times. Now, it is no more confined only to getting their equal rights, which was actually one of the main aims of the feminism movement, but now there is actually a cry for love, for relationship. So, majority of these women poets, they have actually been talking about relationships of men and women. There are at times challenges to the traditional norms, but then one cannot deny the fact that since there is a frank assertion of sex and sexual desires, so there are sexual frustrations also depicted in the poetic oeuvre of Tara Patel. There are questions of unemployment, but then this unemployment has also been treated in a very different manner, because this unemployment, especially while dealing with the unemployment in major cities, where the poet says that the unemployed can sleep at any time of the day. The unemployed people, and then while talking about that poem, we shall come to that poem if time permits us. So, there she talks about how the desire increases and how the unemployed people often, when they get even a 10 rupee or a 20 rupee note or some money, I think they start thinking about so many things. So, there is a conflict within selves. Then we can also find a clash between expectation and reality. The world you expect of to be a sort of dreamy place, but at times it becomes a very dreary desert. And then the theme of corporeality of the body is also working in majority of the poems. So, since he has got only one collection, it is actually time that we took up some of the poems, and let us start with the very important one, which actually is entitled Woman. I shall read some of the lines, and it would not be possible to describe and discuss all the lines, but whenever there is a major line where we find Tara Patel's voice, fine, we can find, because the persona in Tara Patel, it actually cries for a sort of voice, and the voice for a sort of fulfillment. And then in such a way, she actually talks about how the tradition always comes in and between, but such a tradition has actually to be revolted against, and that is why some of the poems of Tara Patel actually bring a sort of rebellion. But then this rebellion she considers to be good, she considers to be better. And let us have a look at these lines of this famous poem entitled Woman, where she says, "A woman's life is a reaction to the crack of a whip, to the crack of a whip, treatment of women at the hands of men. She learns to dodge it as it whistles around her, but sometimes it lands on the thick, distorted welt of her memory." No, they have actually been used to a sort of subjugation, but this subjugation actually becomes a part of her memory, the part of the memory of the persona, and it keeps the persona haunting time and again. And what this wealth of memory does, reminding her of lessons learnt in the past. So, here the poet actually takes us back to the past, where traditions were most revered, and the women were supposed simply to be a sort of commodity. They were simply subjected to a sort of persecution, but now the time has come that the women can get out of it. Now the woman can have a control of her own rights and duties, a freedom of her own choice. Then in rebellion she turned her face to the whip. Then in rebellion she turned her face to the whip, till pain became a river in flood, wreaking vengeance. Now, an attitude of revenge. Fine. It was only in the past that they could be subjected to any sort of persecution, but now she has actually been able to turn her face to the whip, meaning thereby she can confront now. She can confront the years of our tradition and she can rebut it now. She ran away to live as an escaped convict or a refugee or a yogi in wilderness of civilization. So, what the woman can do or what the woman are supposed to do, she can run away from all these things. She can turn the tables upon the man-made world, and she can go to live as a sort of escaped, as an escaped convict, fine, the simile being used here, or a yogi in wilderness of civilization beneath the thick, distorted self of her memory. So, in her own memory she finds how women have been subjected to all sorts of persecutions, sufferings, anguish, pain and what not. But then now she can look back and she can find her distorted self of memory. She dreams, she keeps on thinking. It comes to her in a dream. She dreams anyone could have touched baby smooth skin with kisses. And we find a sort of self-esteem, a sort of self-sympathy, a sort of aggression that she wants to wage against the man-made world, but at the same time she says she dreams anyone could have touched baby smooth skin with kisses. She is actually deprived of love. But then in her wealth of memory she goes back and she actually yearns for a sort of love. So, it appears that a woman who has been subjected to all sorts of trials and tribulations now, then when she stands face to face with their aggressors, she has only got a dream, and in her dream she thinks, if somebody could be so compassionate, if somebody could shower the same lady with the kisses of a baby smooth skin on her. But then this continues, the sort of love that the woman is yearning for, this continues in one poem after another. Actually, Tara Patel's poems are revolutionary in the sense that not only does she talk about a woman who has been subjected to all sorts of suffering, but then in her heart of hearts, because now there is a sort of loneliness, and the poet may also think of herself sandwiched between either a sort of lonely person or a loner. It is only for the time to decide. And so in her yearning, in her desire, in her craving, in her crazy body or in her crazy soul, there comes a sort of request. And to whom is this request? This request is not to the feminist, but this request is to the men of the world and to the men who have actually left the women, because there is a new age where once you become conscious of your own rights, perhaps after few years you feel yourself like a lonely fellow, like a fellow who has been abandoned, and then again the body and the heart, they actually crave for a sort of beseeching, they crave for a sort of request. So, we can also take some lines from another poem that is titled Request. Sometimes, now in the earlier poem we talked about how the woman goes back to her wealth of memory. Now, in her wealth of memory, when she thinks of all bad things, now she imagines, there is a different sort of imagination now, and she imagines, and in her imagination there is a request, and she says, sometimes for old time's sake, you should look me up. Now here is actually the desire of a woman who feels herself neglected, who feels herself deprived, who feels herself dejected, who feels herself as a castaway thing, and she actually vouches and vies for a sort of love. And love of whom? Love of a man who could satisfy her feelings, love of a man who could satisfy her carnal desires, who could satisfy her wills. What are those wills? You should look me up, have lunch with me, I will pay the bill. I will pay the bill. How little I know you, though I loved you for so long and still do for old time's sake. There is actually a dig on the man's world, but at the same time a woman who feels that she cannot live alone. She always vies for a sort of companionship, for a sort of friend, for somebody to give a sort of companionship, and that is why she says, you should look me up, have lunch with me. And you see the irony, and she says, earlier the practice was that you wanted to oblige me, but now I want to oblige you, but only for myself. I will pay the bill. How little I know you, even though I loved you for so long and still do for old time's sake. Can you? Because I have been left. Can you, even for the sake of the old times, can you come? Can you have a lunch with me, even at my own cost? You cannot forget me so completely. Remember me a little and meet me sometimes. Once in a while for a good luck, do not negate the past, indulge me in. The past, the memory which has always been very painful, and perhaps we cannot forget this, neither you nor I. But still, even when you forget, can you really forget me completely? But even for the sake of that love, why don't you come for a good luck? Why do you want to negate the past? Because we always say, it is all over, no? It is all over. You have to forget things. And the poem furthers, not because I want to embarrass you. By unfolding the past, I do not want to embarrass you. It is not your lack of love which distresses me anymore. I am no longer obsessed with a blind emotion. My emotions are no more blind, which promises everything and nothing. You have to be young forever to be in love like that. Actually, once this feminist phase is over, or the women have been able to get back their due, now, but then the aging process with times, as one ages, as one has to live a life of abandonment, still one wants to revive one's old times by saying, young forever to be in love like that. The love that we had, that might have been sort of treacherous, but still I want to retreat, I want to get that love back. I will not bore you with detail of how I lived for months after your exit. It actually talks about the disappointment and the dejection in love. And still the persona here says, I won't embarrass you. I won't be talking about, because you might be frustrated when I start unfolding the memory lane and I talk about alleging you, how you exit, how you left me and had an exit. But because I am pining for an old pleasure, pining for, yearning for, craving for, thinking of, have lunch with me one of these days. I miss you most when I am eating alone. So here the persona not only talks of recovering or retreating to the old love in order to get herself have the feeling that one has always to be young to be in love like that. And then the last stanza where she says, a man should look up a woman sometimes for old time's sake, for regions other than those which are obsolete, regions other than those which are obsolete, have lunch with me, I will pay the bill. So I am ready to pay the bill. And she says, pay the bill, it can have different connotations. But then the poet, the persona here wants simply to revive in the memory, in order to have a sort of recovery of the sort of loneliness and the abandonment that she is facing. And that is why she says a man should look up a woman sometimes simply for old time's sake. Time passes on, time fleets fast, we become aged, we become old, but then we can still revive, we can still have a sort of assertion, still we can have a sort of satisfaction of our old time love. So every man should try to look up a woman sometimes for old time's sake. Now, having seen and read this poem, you might have noted certain concerns or certain characteristic features of Tara Patel's poetry. Tara Patel's poetry, when she talks about tradition, which actually binds a person, tradition creates a sort of binding, but then we are advancing in terms of age, advancing with the situation that are around us. The world is changing, and in the changed world, we should not say a goodbye to our old love. The setting is Indian, but time and again you can find that there is a voice, there is a sort of outcry, and this voice sometimes makes us feel that it is persona's personal voice. As regards language, you can feel that the language flows very spontaneously. It doesn't have the use of vocabulary which is very difficult for people to understand. Rather, the vocabulary is very simple. Of course, as we take up some other poems, you will also find that how these single women, they have to face different situations in their life, and especially in the metros where they have to face different realities, the realities of growing up, the realities of a working woman, the realities of aging, the reality of when you are sandwiched between social compulsions and your personal desire, where the desire always is relegated to the back seat. And then there is a stark reality of women's life where their freedom which they are vying for, and how this new freedom actually not only fills their own life with a sort of blessing, but there is actually a sort of disgust. There is also a sort of disillusionment. There is a note of alienation and loneliness, where people, especially in metros, they look for, where there is a lack of communication, you will find, the same lack of communication which T.S. Eliot has written or mentioned in one of his major collections entitled The Wasteland, where the lady also feels herself to be very lonely, and she simply wants to talk to her own person, her own man, who simply says, yes, I remember we are in a rat alley where the dead men lost their bones. So there are talks of locked Indian womanhood where there is a tradition, and then there is also a critique of the dominance of man. Here we can take up one line which actually denotes the anguish of a lonely lady, a lady who has been left, a lady who is vying for companionship, and a lady who finds her freedom bolted. Gift me a smile I can float on. I have nothing in my life to claim, I have nothing in my life to clutch on. At least a smile can make my life easier. Warm myself in. If you give me a smile, I can not only float on, I can rather move on, I can save myself. A look, a touch, word, smile are all on par. I think a smile is just like a touch. It is just like a look. I mean, here the lady talks about a sort of indifference with growing age, how the solitary woman suddenly becomes an object of indifference, an object which does not attract any attention. So there is a sort of cry, there is a sort of self-denial. Now what the lady should do, and the lady now talks about how of now and then. I mean, there is, with the title of the poem only, we can find that there is a sort of comparison of the two pictures, but unless and until we go through the lines, we cannot understand the nitty-gritty and the beauty and the benignity, where the lady, as I said, a lady who actually being in a house, having all sorts of manifestations, having all sorts of facilities, feels a sort of loneliness, a sort of disintegrity, a sort of disintegrated self that the lady becomes, and the lady says, you want to talk to someone. It is actually, time and again you will find you. And who is this you? This you is none other than the persona of this poem. You want to talk to someone, you want to talk to someone seriously, quietly, without the distraction of getting angry, of crying or touching. You don't want to beg. Now the time has come. Then when the persona feels herself or himself alone, and in this period of loneliness, she simply wants to talk to someone, and talk to someone very seriously, very quietly. She is not at all bothered about what the people will say now. So see the new voice, the new woman's voice. She is not at all bothered about what the world will say. You want to talk to someone, not confidentially, not in private. The whole world must listen in. You want to talk to someone because silence is a kind of suicide. My dear friends, the contemporary world has become such where people living in the same tower, in the same apartment, they are all divided, individual selves, separated. There are many new things that are developing, and the poetess has very beautifully mentioned here, and she says, now the time has come, then when I am thinking of talking to someone seriously, and I am not at all worried about what the people will say, because now this silence is a killer. This silence will kill me. This silence is just like a suicide. Has not a time come when with growing age, all of us become a thing of neglect, and we want that we should be paid attention to, and especially somebody who was loved once upon a time, and then somebody who is actually yearning, longing to hear the voices of love, the voices of compassion, the voices of cordiality, the voices of commitment. You want to be 18. Hike up a hill, again goes wealth, the well of memory. You want to be 18, you want to go back. Kiss beneath a lime tree in the light of 100 candles before a Catholic shrine. No regulations now. I want to go back to enjoy the pleasures of the past. And then the new woman does not bother about what people will say. The color of zinnias burning in your eyes, the desire, just like the beautiful zinnia flower. Here the poet actually talks about the zinnia flower, which is planted and grown in America. Fine. And then she is not confined only to long for a talk. Rather, she also says, you want to eat oranges, try dodging raindrops. Make clouds in your coffee. When did you last look into a mirror? Age has come upon you. And when did you last look up into a mirror and smile like a geranium petal? When did you last dream? When did you last get wet? When did you last become emotional? When did you last become romantic? So the old days actually are haunting at the back of the mind of the lady. You want to talk and talk to someone other than yourself. Now you do not want to talk to yourself because this silence cuts you to the quick. You want to have a sort of companion. Fine. This isolation in a metro city, no, it is actually killing people. Every now and then, people appear to be quite alone. In the end, you don't want to talk to anyone. You want to keep quiet. You want someone to talk to you. You have talked to yourself too much. So there is a sort of introspection now. And you cannot talk to yourself anymore. Rather, you want someone to talk to you. Someone should ask you about how you are. Someone should ask you about how your days are passing by. Someone should say some amount of sympathy, some amount of compassion, some amount of love, some amount of concern. Because this aging will not stop. And this aging and this passing on, no, sometimes becoming a loner, sometimes living in a woman's hostel, and then there is another poem which is entitled In a Working Women's Hostel. This actually talks about the fate of those women who have to take their shelters in the hostel, because at least in the hostel they could get some companions. At least in a hostel they can come across some other people, and especially in a women's hostel where they can share their joys, where they can share their sorrows. And the lines of the poem are very beautiful, my dear friends. So let's look at some of the lines, even though time is always wanting, but then we can always continue. The evening is an experience of high tide, 12 stories above the city. Now the persona of this poem goes to the terrace, because inside there is complete silence, inside there is isolation. Goes to the terrace in order to see the world moving. In movement alone is rest, my dear friends. Or you see how she questions herself. Am I lonely or am I a loner? So there is a sort of conflict, there is a sort of self-doubt, and she thinks, have I been left alone or am I a loner? Is it my fate? Is it my attitude? The difference must be resolved quickly now. My private communion is overlooked by superior balconies and terraces. And then as the lines move further, she says, a patchwork of lights coming on complete, gaudily with the stars, the rising full moon tells a familiar story. So there's an analogy between the full moon and the lady here. So thinks about how the moon also is alone. A bridge purrs, inspires fear, a trip over. Now see the beautiful use. So whenever we talk about the word purr, we are suddenly reminded of cat. And when we are reminded of cat, we are reminded of the sort of fear that the cat very beautifully purrs. The silver wings fluttering on the crazy floor, a distant sea roars in my ears. So from the terrace, I can come across all sorts of feelings and look at the sky, look at the sea, and then I can hear a sort of roar inside. Up here, flight is a dangerous illusion. Crying is a terminal argument. I return to my room. So having found nothing, having simply found some analogies, fine, of loneliness, I come back to my room. And in the second part, the persona says, waking up at night is a symptom of aging. What actually makes us all revere Tara Patel is the way her line flows, without any inhibitions, without any botheration, but there is a natural flow. And she says, I kick inside the warm weather when there is loneliness, nobody, no companion, then I suddenly retreat to my own self. I look at my own limbs. I actually touch my own thighs. Is an embarrassment in the winter cold. I try to fold myself up in supplication to hear myself more clearly. It is actually very confessional, no? And she says, listening to my own confessions is a third degree pastime. I function as a one woman courtroom. I have sealed up my life in black. I have sealed up my life in black envelopes. I have sealed up my life in black envelopes. So black stands for darkness. Black stands for negation. Addressed to no one in particular. So what is there? I find myself that I have no companion with me, no one to come and join me as a companion, and I find I have sealed up my life in black envelopes, addressed to no one in particular. Addressed to no one in particular, but then confidential. It is the rough wool of a man you want tonight and every night. So the bodily, the carnal desires. And then towards the end she says, a woman can feed herself. Love begins with a man. To live alone is of course a very difficult task, and you need human companion. So, here the woman talks about a woman's desire, but then we have seen in many of the poems of some other poets where even other poets have also mentioned about this loneliness, fine, and then they have actually been longing for human accompaniment, and so on and so on. The color of bones is in my hair now, and I have come to a standstill. It appears as if everything has come to a standstill. The passing days have a posthumous touch to them. The passing days, it appears as if it is a posthumous touch to them. Now I do not feel any touch. Now I do not have any regret, because now I am still. Yet I think of my own confession. Am I lonely or am I a loner? So, this conflict between the self, between the body and the soul continues in one poem after another. So, having discussed all this, now we can find that Tara Patel's Poetic World is full of Indianness, where you can find about certain traditions, where you can also find about the use of many Indian words in the form of imagery, gulmohar, sindoor, poetry, sari, all these things are there. There are mythological characters also getting mentioned in the Poetic World of Tara Patel, where she talks about Ram, Sita, Krishna, Yogi and all. Majority of her poems have got Indian settings, and it would not be out of, fine, it is not be a sort of exaggeration to quote here what M.K. Nayak says about Tara Patel. What she says is that interesting feature of Patel's verse is the sparseness of imagery in it. Sparseness of imagery in it. It is a poetry of transparent directness. One can find that the language is very direct. It is perhaps here that the influence of Ezekiel is to be seen. You must remember that Ezekiel was a great support, and Ezekiel had also influenced Tara Patel too much. So, it is unfortunate, what he says is, it is unfortunate that Patel ceased to publish after her first collection. She did not have any other collection after her first work, but then the amount of knowledge, the amount of pain, suffering, the amount of anguish which we have found in Tara Patel's poetry is full of despair and existential crisis. Where in one poem after another you can find a note of despair, as if in some other poem where we find a sort of alienation in Now and Then, where she talks about you want to talk to someone because silence is a kind of suicide. Such powerful lines that we come across, fine. So, and then in a way she challenges the male hegemony, but then as Bruce King has rightly said that there is actually a treatment of women by men, but then the opposition is not a sort of misandry. I mean, in earlier poets we have found that they have talked about man's indifference, but here we find the persona of Tara Patel actually yearns for human company, for men's company, and that is why she says, you are cursed by your parents, you cannot love voluntarily. So, again there is a dig on the tradition, and she says that all sorts of relationships have been hampered because you cannot love voluntarily, you cannot love somebody because you want to love or because you have a choice. Now, there are quite many things in Tara Patel's world, but then we can find that Tara Patel is free from the mention of sexual taboos and all. She actually at times appears to be very unconventional, but what she speaks comes out from the depth of her heart. We can take one very important poem entitled Calangute Beach. We can take some of the lines before we come to end this talk. When in this poem, the poem is entitled Calangute Beach, where she talks about how she denied the advances to an American for whom she had her longing, but then she could not because the persona in this poem is actually an Indian, and she says, His invitation to go swimming naked was turned down. A long brown look accentuated the loneliness of my inhibitions. And then what is of utmost importance is when the poet says, both of us knew there was no time for persuasion. I should have gone to share the sun's wine. Sun's wine with him. It's such a man's arms. It must be permanently afternoon. It's such a man's arms. There must be pleasure. There must be complete happiness. But then again, she takes a dig where she says, women's lib in India is skin deep, baby. For weeks I can brood of nothing else. He is a growing regret. She shows a regret. He is a growing regret. The denial to him was a sort of regret. And then a very beautiful metaphor is being used here, like a red bulb off and on, reminding me of men I cannot afford, because traditions come in and between, and that is how I find life to be lived alone, life to be lived without any companion. So, having discussed all these, we can take some of the critical assessments or critical views about Tara Patel very quickly, where Eunice D'Souza, what she says is, Patel's work is weariness so extreme that it sounds almost posthumous. And what Bruce King had said, no matter how much about tragedy or even if victims usually end in victories, triumph, affirmation, heaven, dignity, Patel simply ignores such expectations and conventions. She actually is unconventional, as I have been saying. She has written a book of poems about life's disaster without pretending it really is not so bad after all. So, Patel does not consider herself to be a poet, but then as readers, when we read her poems, we find the real poet that Patel was. And Panikar and Chandraka in their article says, the woman who suffers and the mind which creates are so closely identified here. I mean, the woman who suffers and the mind that creates are the one and not two. What Tara Patel has to say is said without any disguise, without any deception, without any inhibition, and that is what we have been belaboring over in this lecture, and I think that we have been able to understand the real worth of Tara Patel. And before I close, let me take a very important line from Tara Patel, who says, my permanent address is hell. And further, you already remember when she says, I function as a one-woman courtroom. I have to decide for myself, because in my court, I see my cases being discussed, and it is my own courtroom. I have sealed my life in black envelopes addressed to one in particular. Fine? Addressed one in particular. I think with this, we have to wind up this talk. Thank you very much. I wish you all a very good day ahead. Thank you. Waiting for you to discuss on another topic, where we shall discuss another woman poet named Menika Shibdashani. Thank you very much.